The story I'll tell today began on a rainy, melancholy Tuesday in the month of June, precisely at 7:15 in the morning, when Clara Santos arrived for the first time at the imposing three-story mansion of Roberto Almeida, located in the city's most noble neighborhood. At only 32 years old, she carried a small, worn blue fabric backpack, a white plastic bag with her few clothes folded carefully, and a fragile hope of rebuilding her life after 8 extremely difficult months. The tall, forged iron gate, painted black, opened slowly with a metallic creak that echoed down the silent street, revealing a perfectly trimmed garden where white and red roses exhaled a sweet perfume that contrasted with the fresh smell of rain on the wet earth. Roberto Almeida, 45 years old, watched from the window of the second-floor office lined with noble wood, his tired eyes fixed on that thin woman who climbed the marble steps with hesitant but determined steps. Clara's first impression upon entering the main hall was one of absolute astonishment. The shiny marble floor reflected the golden light of the immense crystal chandelier that hung from the high ceiling decorated with worked plaster. The walls were covered in expensive beige and gold wallpaper, and old paintings framed in gilded frames probably cost more than she would earn in years of work. The air inside the house was fresh but heavy, laden with an oppressive silence that seemed to suck all life from the environment. There were no laughs echoing through the corridors, no music playing in any room, no smell of coffee being prepared or bread baking in the oven. Only cold, desolate silence that made that huge mansion seem more like a mausoleum than a home where people lived, loved, and built shared memories. Clara shivered when she realized she couldn't hear any human life inside that enormous house, which could easily shelter an entire family, but seemed to house only ghosts of a happier past. His black hair showed silver strands at the temples, and his erect posture couldn't hide the invisible weight he carried on his shoulders. He greeted Clara with a minimal nod of the head, without smiling, without extending his hand, keeping a professional distance that made clear which place each person held in that social hierarchy. He explained the tasks in a monotonous, weary voice, pointing to different rooms as he spoke about fixed meal times, specific cleaning preferences, and strict rules about private areas forbidden to staff, especially his personal office, his third-floor bedroom, and the locked room at the end of the corridor that no one should ever enter for any reason whatsoever. Clara listened attentively, mentally noting every instruction, preference, and rule. She quietly observed that Roberto spoke without ever looking directly into her eyes, as if making eye contact with a housemaid were socially inappropriate. She noticed the deep lines of fatigue around his eyes, the worry wrinkles on his forehead, and above all, the complete absence of any sparkle of life in his gaze, which seemed dead and empty inside. There was something deeply disturbing about this rich man who had everything money could buy but clearly had none of what really mattered. During the first 5 days of work, the dynamic between them remained formal and distant, marked only by polite greetings and neutral-toned professional instructions. Clara woke at 5:30 in the morning when her old alarm clock rang in the small back room, prepared strong coffee which she drank alone in the kitchen lit only by the refrigerator light, and began her tasks with a silent dedication that even impressed Donna Marta, the 62-year-old cook who had worked in the house for 15 years and had seen at least 10 different staff come and go in the last 2 years. There was something inexplicable in Clara's look, a mixture of deep sorrow and poorly masked pain, but also a fierce determination that shone like a small but persistent flame. Her movements were precise as she cleaned, organized, and tidied each room carefully. But sometimes Roberto would catch her standing in front of a window, looking at the garden with a distant, melancholy expression, lost in thoughts that clearly transported her to another time and place. He observed all this discreetly during the solitary breakfast she served punctually at 7, or in the equally silent dinner she placed on the table at 7 at night, always intrigued by that woman who seemed to carry a world of untold stories in her sad eyes. The turning point happened on a cloudy Thursday afternoon around 4:20, when Roberto went down to the garden seeking peace away from the numbers and spreadsheets that dominated his empty professional life. He found Clara sitting on the stone bench next to the old fountain that hadn't worked for months, shoulders trembling as tears ran down her pale face. Her hands held tightly to a small, worn photograph, and her muffled sobs were the only only sound breaking the silence of the abandoned garden. Roberto, moved by an impulse he himself couldn't explain, sat slowly beside her on the cold bench, keeping a respectful but present distance. He said nothing at first, simply staying there in supportive silence, and after long minutes, Clara finally managed to speak with an impassioned, trembling voice. She revealed, between painful sobs and long pauses, that she had lost her mother exactly 8 months and 23 days earlier, the victim of a sudden car accident that had completely destroyed her life, leaving her totally alone in the world, desperately struggling to rebuild her financially ruined and emotionally shattered existence. She showed the crumpled photograph. It was of her hugging her mother on a happy birthday, both radiant with smiles, completely unaware of the tragic future that awaited them. He said that his 15-year marriage had ended extremely painfully 26 months earlier, when he discovered a long affair that destroyed his ability to trust anyone again. He explained that since then he had shut himself off emotionally, building high walls around his wounded heart, obsessively dedicating himself to work as a way to avoid feeling the pain of deep loneliness and devastating rejection. He admitted that despite all his material wealth and professional success, he felt completely empty inside, like a luxurious house, but totally abandoned and lifeless. They talked for more than 2 hours, sitting on that bench while the sun slowly set, painting the sky orange and pink. They shared stories of loss, pain, loneliness, and fear of the future. And for the first time in many months, both felt something they had forgotten: the comforting sensation of being truly understood by another person who also intimately knew the pain of losing something precious and irreplaceable. Clara began to make small, subtle, but significant changes to the environment that had previously seemed frozen in time. Fresh jasmine and lavender flowers on the table every Monday morning, a genuine smile for everyone she crossed paths with, words of encouragement in difficult moments. She didn't realize it, but she was slowly bringing life, color, and warmth to that place that had once seemed so cold and impersonal. Roberto found himself eagerly anticipating the breakfast conversations they now shared, when they exchanged stories of their lives while the sun entered through the windows lighting the kitchen. She spoke passionately about her simple childhood in the countryside, about the dreams she had kept for years, about the strength her mother had taught her. He, for the first time in years, opened up about his fears, his insecurities hidden behind the facade of success, about how he had lost himself in the relentless pursuit of professional recognition. She recounted how her mother woke at 5 in the morning to make homemade bread, whose smell filled the whole house. How she used to sing old songs while washing clothes in the backyard. How her contagious laugh made everyone smile even on the hardest days. She described in moving detail how her mother worked 3 jobs at the same time to ensure that she could study and have better opportunities. How she never complained about extreme tiredness or financial difficulties. How she always found reasons to be grateful and celebrate small, everyday joys. Roberto listened to every word with fascinated attention, gradually realizing that he had spent years focusing only on accumulating more money, more power, more social status, but had completely forgotten to truly live, to appreciate simple but profoundly meaningful moments of human existence. A particularly notable incident happened on a gray Monday morning at exactly 9:15, when Roberto received devastating news that a crucial deal had failed completely due to circumstances beyond his control. The financial loss was significant, easily amounting to millions, but the wound to his ego was infinitely greater and more painful than any material loss. For the first time in his entire adult life, of accumulated successes and professional victories, he allowed Clara to see him completely vulnerable, totally human, stripped of all the social masks carefully built and all the emotional defenses strategically erected. Clara was organizing old books in the library when she heard a strange sound coming from the adjoining office, a muffled but unmistakable sob of an adult man crying. She immediately dropped what she was doing and ran there, finding Roberto sitting in his expensive leather chair with his head between his trembling hands, shoulders shaking violently. And when the tears finally came uncontrollably after years held back behind a rigid dam of male pride and societal expectations, she held his trembling hand firmly and gently, conveying with that simple touch that he was not alone, that someone genuinely cared. that it was okay to be vulnerable and human. They stayed like that for almost a full hour in a silence that paradoxically said more than 1,000 words could express adequately. There was no judgment in her brown eyes when she finally looked at him, only pure compassion and deep understanding. She whispered softly that her mother used to say the greatest lessons of life didn't come from easy and predictable successes, but from painful, unexpected falls that forced us to rise again stronger and wiser. She said that the lost money could eventually be recovered with time and work, but that the most important thing was that he still had his health, his intelligence, and his ability to start over. And now he had something he had long ago lost, the ability to truly feel, to be authentically human again. Over the next 4 months, something developed between them that neither expected or consciously planned, a deep and genuine emotional connection that transcended conventional professional relationships or rigid social expectations. It wasn't only superficial physical attraction, although there was certainly undeniable magnetic chemistry when they were near each other. It was something much deeper and more meaningful, genuine mutual respect and growing admiration for each other's character, the transformative recognition that they had found in each other someone who really understood their deepest pains, their most secret fears, their most intimate and true dreams. Clara intensely faced her own devastating emotional challenges during that turbulent and transformative period of painful personal growth. There were long, lonely nights in which the sharp, lancing pain of the irreversible loss of her beloved mother returned with devastating force like a giant wave, leaving her awake until 3 in the morning wondering if she would really be able to continue living, whether she had enough strength inside to go on alone in this immense and frightening world. There were critical moments of real temptation to give up completely on everything, to run back to the known and comfortable safety of her past, even if it meant returning to poverty and severe limitations, even if it meant giving up everything she had been building with so much effort and dedication day after day. But whenever she wavered dangerously at the edge of total surrender and emotional collapse, Roberto was present in some way, sometimes with a kind, encouraging word said at the exact moment she needed to hear something positive, sometimes simply with his silent but supportive presence that made her feel less alone in the world, sometimes with a simple but deeply significant gesture that reminded her she wasn't completely alone on that difficult journey and that someone genuinely cared about her well-being and happiness. One particularly difficult and emotionally charged morning that would remain forever etched in both of their memories, Clara had a severe and frightening panic attack while preparing the morning coffee in the silent kitchen. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, causing the cups to clink dangerously. Her breathing became short and extremely difficult, as if there wasn't enough air in the room. Her heart raced wildly in her tight chest, causing real physical pain. Roberto, who had come down earlier than usual that morning, immediately noticed that something was terribly wrong with her. He did not ask intrusive or indiscreet questions, nor demand immediate explanations about what was happening. He simply remained present, solid and reliable like a safe anchor in the midst of the violent emotional storm that shook her that moment. When she finally managed to breathe more normally, and the tears began to flow, releasing all the built-up tension, he simply hugged her with care and genuine respect, offering his strong shoulder as a safe place for her to cry without judgment or reproach of any kind. That moment of shared vulnerability changed something fundamental and irreversible between them that would never be the same after that remarkable day. Roberto clearly perceived that his own old, deep emotional wounds were beginning to heal slowly through the simple but powerful act of genuinely caring for another person, of putting someone else's emotional needs above his own professional concerns and ego. Clara deeply understood that despite all the glaring differences in social class and economic situation that separated them in the eyes of the world, they shared the same essential humanity, the same basic needs for true connection, mutual understanding, and unconditional love that all human beings carry in their hearts, regardless of how much money they have or what social position they occupy. Part 3. Roberto was aggressively confronted by 3 influential and powerful family members during an extremely tense formal dinner at the mansion on a Saturday night. His older sister, Ana Luisa, 50 years old, who had always been extremely controlling and overly concerned with social appearances, his brother-in-law, Marcelo, a conservative and extremely traditional businessman, and his mother, Dona Beatriz, 72 years old, who came from a generation where class differences were considered absolutely insurmountable and sacred. They vehemently and publicly disapproved without any embarrassment of the intimate relationship increasingly evident between him and Clara in the eyes of those watching. They argued angrily with thinly veiled prejudice about class differences considered completely insurmountable by traditional society, about financial conveniences and protection of family wealth accumulated over generations, about public appearances and social reputation that absolutely had to be preserved at any cost to maintain the image the family had built carefully through decades of effort and dedication. Dona Beatriz was particularly cruel, cutting and venomous in her harsh words, saying without shame that Clara was clearly an opportunistic, calculating woman who had cowardly taken advantage of his emotional vulnerability to try to secure a life of comfort without working for it, living off the money the family had worked so hard to accumulate. For a whole week, excruciating and which seemed like an eternity to both of them, Roberto cowardly gave in to the overwhelming external pressure and suffocating family expectations, distancing himself coldly from Clara without offering any honest explanation, no valid justification, no clear conversation about what was really happening and why he was acting so suddenly and confusingly. He simply stopped having breakfast with her, as they had done religiously every day for months, began leaving the house much earlier than usual in the morning, and returning much later at night to avoid any encounter or interaction, communicating only through cold and impersonal notes left on the kitchen table with instructions about household chores. Clara, deeply hurt and wounded but firmly keeping her dignity and self-respect even in the pain, did not demand humiliating explanations, did not beg desperately for attention or recognition by degrading herself, did not submit to pleading for scraps of affection like an abandoned dog waiting for any sign of affection. She continued doing her job with the same impeccable professional dedication as always, but the hopeful, joyful shine had completely disappeared from her brown eyes, now dull, distant, and deeply sad again as they had been when she first arrived at that house months earlier. It was precisely in that critical, transformative moment of forced and painful separation that both finally understood the true and frightening depth of their genuine feelings for each other that had grown silently but intensely over those months of daily coexistence and shared vulnerability. Roberto painfully realized during sleepless nights turning over in bed that he was repeating the exact same destructive and toxic patterns that had irreparably destroyed his previous marriage, systematically and cowardly, placing the superficial and empty approval of others far above his own authentic happiness and emotional well-being, prioritizing what others thought and said about him instead of following his own heart and doing what he knew in his bones was right. He recognized with growing bitterness and deep remorse that he was once again prioritizing external social expectations at the expense of what his finally freed and healed heart screamed loudly and clearly was the true path. Clara recognized through bitter tears shed in the lonely silence of her small back-room house during long, sleepless early mornings that she unquestionably deserved someone who would choose her without cowardly hesitation, without publicly shaming her for her humble origins, without hiding her like a shameful secret that needed to be kept in the shadows away from the judgmental eyes of an elitist, prejudiced society. The reconciliation did not happen dramatically, explosively, cinematically, or loaded with exaggerated romantic gestures worthy of Mexican soap operas. It was on an ordinary, quiet Friday afternoon, around 5 in the evening when the sun began to set, tinting the sky with beautiful orange and pink hues, that Roberto appeared nervously at the door of the small, simple, but clean and cozy house Clara rented in a modest neighborhood far from the ostentatious, noble neighborhoods where he was used to circulating. He did not bring expensive, extravagant flowers imported from distant, exotic countries, nor flashy, impressive gifts wrapped in glossy paper from famous stores, nor did he arrive in a showy car to impress curious neighbors watching through windows. He brought only his raw and painful honesty exposed without protective masks, his complete vulnerability shown without artificial defenses, his heart finally truly open for the first time in many years of self-imposed isolation. He apologized profoundly and sincerely, not with hollow words repeated mechanically without real feeling, but with a firm promise and commitment to concrete and verifiable actions from that point on that would truly show he had changed for real. He said in an emotional voice with teary eyes that he was genuinely willing to courageously face any severe and unfair social judgment, any malicious and prejudiced public criticism, any difficult family consequences, including the possible severance of ties, if necessary, because he had finally learned the most crucial lesson of his whole life, that true, genuine, and lasting love requires real courage to face the whole world, if necessary, to protect and honor what really matters. Clara, for her part, did not make things easy, simple, or immediate for him as he might have naively expected. Not because she wanted petty revenge or to play manipulative, childish emotional games to make him suffer intentionally, but because she legitimately needed to be absolutely certain that he had really changed deeply and permanently at the core of his being, that he would not again cowardly yield to external family pressure at the first difficulty that might arise in the future and test his resolve. She set extremely clear and completely non-negotiable conditions that demonstrated her preserved self-respect and dignity. He would have to publicly and officially introduce her to his entire family as the woman he truly and deeply loved, and not as a convenient employee or shameful secret. He would have to include her in important social events without any shame or hesitation, showing pride. He would have to actively and vocally defend her whenever anyone disrespected or treated her with unjust prejudice, regardless of who that person was or which social position they occupied. She made crystal clear that she deserved a complete, public, proud love without shame or secret reservations of any kind, and that she would accept nothing less because she had learned through her own suffering that accepting scraps of affection was a betrayal of herself. They spent the following 5 weeks carefully and patiently rebuilding damaged and broken trust, brick by careful brick, sincere and vulnerable conversation by deep and honest conversation, where they both opened completely, concrete and meaningful gesture by demonstrative gesture of real commitment that went beyond pretty words and empty promises. Roberto began to act completely differently than the past that had defined him for so long. He canceled a hugely important business meeting that could have resulted in a multi-million contract to be present at a difficult moment when Clara was emotionally struggling. He took her publicly to dinner at a famous, expensive downtown restaurant where he knew for sure he would find acquaintances, colleagues, and other businessmen who might judge, presenting her proudly and firmly to his most important business partner as someone extremely special and important in his life, without any shame or hesitation. Each concrete and verifiable action clearly demonstrated that his words finally matched his verifiable actions and that the change was genuine and not merely performative to win her back. Part 4. He began the tense dinner with an emotional and remarkably brave speech that left everyone present absolutely shocked and speechless, saying clearly and without ambiguity that Clara had completely transformed his empty and meaningless life into something full of true meaning, purpose, and genuine joy again, that she had taught him through her living example the true value of a person, which had absolutely nothing to do with money in the bank or an ostentatious family surname on a birth certificate. He declared publicly and without hesitation that he loved her deeply and truly with all his finally healed heart, and that anyone who couldn't respect, accept, and honor that love simply would no longer have an active place in his personal life from that moment on, regardless of blood ties or shared family history. It was an impressive and inspiring moment of courage that challenged rigid social conventions and left everyone present mute and forced to confront their own ingrained prejudices. Roberto had finally learned to consciously and actively prioritize genuine, deep, and meaningful relationships over superficial, empty social appearances that brought no real happiness. He began to dedicate real time, quality attention, and genuine, full presence to the people he truly loved and who really mattered in his life, not just hurried scraps of attention split between supposedly important corporate meetings that did not feed his soul. Clara had completely recovered her confidence, deeply shaken by trauma and hardship, and clearly realized without doubt that her humble origins didn't diminish her immense intrinsic value as a human being worthy of love, respect, and genuine admiration. In fact, her difficult life experiences made her even more special, wise, empathetic, and deeply connected to what truly mattered in human existence beyond material possessions. 2 full years had passed since that rainy, melancholy Tuesday morning in June, when everything began so improbably, unexpectedly, and seemingly impossibly by societal standards. Clara was no longer just a domestic employee hired for basic household services. She had become a respected, valued, and essential partner in Roberto's business, bringing a completely new, fresh, human, and fundamental perspective to all major business decisions that had previously been made, considering only cold profits, impersonal numbers, and calculated strategies without considering real human impact. More importantly, and far more meaningfully than any measurable professional success or impressive financial accomplishment, they had carefully and patiently built over those years a solid life partnership based on deep and genuine mutual respect that transcended superficial differences, honest and courageous shared vulnerability that allowed both to be their true, authentic selves without masks, and genuine, lasting, and absolutely unshakable love that had been rigorously tested by external pressures and proven to be real, resilient, and stronger than any obstacle the world could put in their path. It's about 2 courageous, determined people willing to grow who had the inner strength and tremendous courage to be authentically vulnerable even when it was absolutely scary and risky and went against everything they'd been taught about keeping up appearances and protecting themselves emotionally, who consciously chose difficult, painful, but necessary personal growth, even when it was extremely uncomfortable, frightening, and challenging in every imaginable way, who learned through real, painful experiences the crucial and liberating lesson that a person's true value isn't found in a bank account filled with impressive zeros or in a high-status last name, but in the genuine ability to love unconditionally without expecting anything in return, to constantly transform and learn from mistakes without clinging to the past or defining oneself by earlier failures, and to be actively, consistently, and genuinely present for those who truly matter in their lives, building real memories and connections that transcend temporary material possessions. And tell me in the comments what you thought about this particular story, and whether you've ever experienced or know someone who has lived something similar, because your sincere opinion and personal story make all the difference to me and to this wonderful community we're building together based on values of empathy, understanding, and mutual support.